Athletes, take your mark, get set. It's time for the Addict to Athlete podcast. Hey, everybody out there, Coach Blue Robinson here. Thank you so much for downloading, sharing, and subscribing to the podcast. Man, we really appreciate you doing that. And if it's not too much trouble, jump on and leave us a review. It helps get this podcast out a little further and get some direct communication between us and you. So thanks so much for everyone that's done that. Athletes, pay particular attention to our website. 2023 is going to be a great year. We've got lots of events and experiences to be had, and you can find all of our calendar items on meetings and events and races, upcoming stuff right there. Athletic Director Marissa does a great job keeping that thing updated. And we have tons of free resources on how to start your journey to move from addict to athlete. Well, listeners, today I got a great guest that Marissa found on LinkedIn, and she has an incredible story and is doing some amazing work in the state of Florida. Today we're going to be speaking with Tina Miller, who is the founder and the executive director of Florida Recovery Schools of Tampa Bay. And, you know, Tina, as I was reading some of the stuff that Max and Marissa pulled on you, I was blown away by your level of commitment for youth. I told you before we started recording, I've worked with you. That's how I started my career. And it's intense. And so my hat is tipped to you and all of the teachers and folks that are out there helping these kids. I want to talk to you a little bit about this school, why you found a need for it. I think it's unique in purpose. But before we jump into that, thank you for being a guest here on the podcast. Would you mind introducing yourself to the listeners?
Absolutely. My name is Tina Miller. And first and foremost, I'm a child of God.
Yes.
That's just, I always introduce myself. Mm-hmm. First and foremost, I'm a child of God. Second, I am a loving, nurturing mother to a birth son, and I have a foster son as well.
Awesome.
He is now in his late 20s, and I have a servant's heart for people that are incarcerated, people that have lost their way or maybe have never found their way.
Yeah.
And I've just always, I actually grew up in Ohio. I was born and raised in Ohio. And I actually became an atheist at 7 years old because my best friend was kidnapped and murdered.
Oh, my heavens.
And at that point, I had said to myself at 7 years old, if God could allow a 7-year-old to be murdered, there's no God.
I completely understand.
I remember making that decision. Like, I at 7 years old, I made the decision to be an atheist. And so I struggled with atheism. I was a very angry atheist for many, many years because I had lost my way. Huh. And also, people had abused me and raped me. And I had all these traumatic and horrifying things happening to me as a teenager. And so I actually picked up alcohol at 14 years old, and I was addicted to alcohol and drugs by the age of 19.
Wow.
And so I bring that piece, of my story because I think it's important for people to understand survivor guilt.
Yes.
Also how, family addiction, the disease of, addiction, runs rampant in families, as well as, that there's hope, that no matter what you've been through, that there's hope and that God can do a mighty, mighty good work in each one of us. So
brilliant.
That's who I am. And then I'm an author of 5 books and a national speaker. And I'm a Christian comedian, and I've worked over 24 years in social work, education, and juvenile justice.
Holy cow.
And I started the first recovery high school in Tampa Bay.
Well, my heavens, you've been so lazy all these years. What are you doing?
I know, right?
That is incredible, Tina. I love that. And did you find that kind of work and effort you put into, it wasn't really just because you were bored, but it's like you had a different purpose. Like you said, you have a heart of service, and so you saw a void in your community and you filled it. I'm curious about this sober high school. Now, I've seen a few things like this. I think MTV had some kind of series on something like this. I caught a couple of episodes and I was blown away. I had no idea that these things kind of existed. Why did you start pursuing this? I'm curious. You must have seen something in your community that was going unmet. Like how did the ball get rolling for a sober high school? Because I can't imagine the hoops you'd have to jump through.
Oh, yeah. So actually, when I got sober at 23 years old, I was attending the University of Akron. And at 23 years old, some people would say that's not that young, but I would go into 12-step recovery meetings and there wasn't 23-year-olds, Yeah. So I started a few young people's recovery meetings in Ohio, in Akron, Ohio, and Canton, Ohio. And I believe they're still going on to this day. And so that was almost 25 years ago, because I thought, I was going to these meetings and the majority were older men, Yeah,
I've seen them.
They've been divorced 5 times and had 6 DUIs and, fought in Nam. And I'm like, I'm a 23-year-old, young white woman.
I see you raising your hand in the back. Yeah.
Like, how am I going to relate to these people? But what I did hear, and which saved my life, is what I did hear was the hurt and the pain and how lost they were and how, God and people in these rooms loved them back to life. And that's what I needed to hear. I as an atheist at that time, the last thing I needed to hear was someone to say, you're going to hell for your sins. What I needed to hear was, you know what, there's hope because you've lived through hell. Guess what? There's hope. And let me tell you about this guy. Let me tell you about Jesus. And so I needed that approach. And so I did. I found people like that. And I changed my major actually in college from interior design to family and child development because I had a Christian professor that took me aside and she said, honey, everything you've been through is your testimony and God's put you through that and he's going to transform your pain into purpose.
How did that land on you? Because someone pulled me aside and said that same thing and I thought they were nuts. How did that land on you at first? I know you knew you felt it. You felt it was real because I did too. I remember, but I didn't want to believe it. Is that kind of your boat?
So this was at a time when I had, I tried to kill myself. I really wanted to kill myself. I wanted the pain to end. And I was in my darkest place of my addictions. And this woman came to me and hugged me. And it was that soft, loving grace that I needed. And so, it was that moment of clarity that for me, it changed my life. I literally ran from her classroom to my academic advisor and changed my major because I was like, oh my gosh, I do have a purpose. Like I'm not a worthless, drug addict that it has, nothing to give this world. And so, I changed my major. So after, working 24 years in social work and being a licensed therapeutic foster parent and working in juvenile justice, I kept seeing teenagers struggling and falling in the gaps and they were falling in the cracks. And, when they're locked up, they're getting loved on and they're getting, all these people in ministry are coming in to love on them when they're locked up. But it's then they go in the community and it's like everyone just wipes their hands. Okay, now you're free, And so I just kept realizing like there is a need here. It just broke my heart that when they're locked up, they can get a little bit of sobriety, but when they would go back home or to their traditional school, they were relapsing and right back at it. So after realizing that this was a huge need, and I did some research, I saw the TV show, the MTV show, and started doing research. I found that there was one other recovery high school in Florida. It was in Jacksonville. I reached out to that executive director. He mentored me for 3 years. And so I worked on it for about 5 years. And then I opened the doors. Actually,
incredible.
We had the ribbon cutting 2 days ago.
Congratulations.
So, January 4th, we had the ribbon cutting in 2021.
That is incredible.
And we opened the doors, I prayed about it and I said, God, if you give me one student, I'll open these doors. And he gave me 2.
Hey, there you go. So I'll double it. Yeah.
I've always been focused on the lives that we're impacting and it's not about quantity. It's about quality.
Yes.
And that's just how it's been. I look back and I'm like, whoa, I was crazy.
Yes, you have to be. Yeah, I agree.
I quit a state government job with really comfy, salary and insurance and pension and benefits. And, it's just unbelievable job. And I leapt in faith and I started this nonprofit, and I literally went, I think it was 4 months total without pay.
Yeah. Oh, I've been there. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. Within that period of time, I got divorced. I'm a single mom, and it was by the grace of God that I had a roof over our heads and that we ate every day. And, people it was amazing. And to this day, he answers every prayer and all the details. He knows all the details. It's just amazing. The other night I was praying. I woke up at 3 a.m. I was praying to God. I'm like, oh my gosh, we have this bill for $2,800. And the next day I get a check in the mail for a donation for $3,000.
Oh my gosh.
And that's just how he's been.
Yeah. Not a coincidence.
No,
I agree. I agree.
Now I need to start praying for $1 million.
Yeah, like why are you going so low? Let's get it up there.
I know.
You'll get it.
That's what my staff said. They're like, why are you asking for so little?
Oh, that is so cool. I love the fact, listeners, that you're hearing this, because you've heard me talk about it on the podcast. The same kind of concepts of like, you and I both, and a lot of our listeners out there have very good excuses to be world-class addicts. We really do. We've had trauma and pain, and to be able to see the ugly side of humanity and just to put your head down and then give the finger to the world. It would have been so easy for us to do that. I think that I call people like you the agents of recovery, the ones that step forward and say, we're going to get this done. It's giving you an interesting window into the lives of these youth, and I'm firm in my belief that if we don't act now, we're going to have some huge problems later, as the cycle will continue. What kind of reception did you get from other schools, the community, families? Was it mixed emotions? Was it complete and utter support? Was it they want to see it before they believe it? Like, what did the community do when you started creating this?
Well, everyone thinks it's a great idea.
Good.
And I laugh because, it sounds like a great idea. Mm-hmm. And what people have a hard time connecting the dots.
Right.
So, for example, and I didn't even realize this, even though I worked in government, I've worked in state government, county government, city government and all that. I didn't see the politics behind, starting a nonprofit private school.
Yeah.
And so that was the first thing I was in shock. Like, oh my, why do you look at us like we're competition? These are students' lives first and foremost. But second of all, they're not even attending your school. So why would you be upset if they came to mine?
Exactly. Precisely.
And so that was the first shock. The second shock was I was surprised at the recovery community, even though they verbally would say, I support this, but financially, the people that support this nonprofit are the ones that have a real heart. They've been impacted by addiction. Yeah. They've lost a loved one. Those are the people that have really financially supported this nonprofit, which has been mind-blowing.
Here.
Yes. So, I'm not going to say the recovery community is not supportive, because they are, but they're just not as supportive as I thought they would be.
Right.
But it's mostly, relatives, friends and families of people that have died from addictions. Those are the ones that have been financially supportive. I would even say the volunteers, I've been blown away by how many volunteers as well as partnerships. Yeah. Lots of community partnerships. It's been amazing to see how many people have come forward and not only donated, but donated their time, and their talents and their treasures, but also just saying, you know what, I trust you, Tina, and I believe in what you're doing. Yeah. And we know that God's going to make it right, and he's going to do, a mighty good work in this. So
I love it. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's been such a miracle.
Yeah. So tell me the structure of your school, because obviously there's going to be a component to recovery in there. Tell me a little bit about the structure of it. Like, what's the schedule like for your high school?
So we actually have school Monday through Thursday, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m.
That. Yeah.
It is, the one thing that I have realized, we have served 16 students now over the year and a half. Mm-hmm. The one thing I have realized, which I always knew people in recovery, are brilliant, mm-hmm. but I have seen it firsthand.
Yes.
That when you remove the chemicals and substances from these children's brains, it is phenomenal, the progress mm-hmm. and the success. And, for example, my second student that graduated with his diploma with honors in December, he was 16 years old. Mm. Literally in 1 year, he completed all of his work and graduated.
I love it.
Like, he's brilliant.
Yeah.
He starts college like next week.
Holy cow.
He is brilliant. And so when I tell you that once they get focused, they are so focused. But to give you an idea of our schedule, so every morning we do a mental health check-in. Brilliant. And what that looks like is, our priorities, number one priority is to keep our students alive. Number two is to teach them how to emotionally regulate, their selves. Because if you ask people, why did you start using drugs, or why are you mm-hmm. using drugs? Most people say, because, I'm stressed, or I'm angry, or I'm happy, or so they use it. It's emotionally based usually.
Yeah.
And so what we want to do is teach them how to regulate their emotions. So when they're stressed, or they're hyper, or they're angry, or they're nervous or anxious, that we learn how to actually do that without using drugs and substances. So
love it.
That's our second priority. And then also, we want to educate them, but they have to be emotionally and mentally stable before we can educate them. So that morning check-in every morning, it can be from 30 minutes to 2.5 hours.
Love it. So you don't put a time limit on it then, because I can imagine it'd be like, okay, can you, Sally, can you turn it down? We got math next. I love the fact that you let it go. That's amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we are a very go with the flow. Brilliant. Our classrooms are very different than your typical classrooms. We have beanbag chairs, we have yoga balls, we have balancing boards, we have exercise bikes. It's not your typical classroom. They can eat. Actually, I encourage them to eat. It's really important for them to get protein, as well as I'm a water pusher. Yeah. I constantly push water. Uh-huh. Because, when our students come to us, they're usually not only, addicted to drugs and that, but they're addicted to unhealthy lifestyles. So they're not getting exercise. They're not getting enough water. Their brains are dehydrated. They're not getting protein. So their muscles aren't developing the way they should be. And they're not getting, the physical fitness part. So we do all of that. They also get equine therapy with horses every Tuesday morning. We do expressive art therapy, drumming, visual arts, yoga, meditation, sound healing. We have, oh my goodness, you name it. We have done it. We go on field trips all the time.
Holy cow.
I keep them very, very busy. We are a year-round school. So we have them in the summer as well.
I guess you'd have to a certain degree. We could be like 9 months of that, and then all of a sudden 3 months just to kind of go back into the ease.
that would be a disaster.
Wise decision there, principal. Wise decision. I like that.
Yeah. And it's very interesting because, all of my staff are in recovery. Most of my volunteers are in recovery themselves. Mm-hmm. And, so it's very 12-step spiritually based. Mm-hmm. We're an interfaith program because like myself, my staff, we're atheists at one point. And so we have a real heart for people that are not believers in Christ. And so we meet them where they're at. And I think that I think that's important. I think it's important to meet people where they're at spiritually and just love on them until they can love themselves.
Yeah. God, I love that. See, on Team Addict to Athlete, what I noticed is that when we started this program, it was very much different than traditional 12-step meetings and all that kind of stuff. But I noticed that all of a sudden my athletes, the people that I was doing therapy and counseling with, they started attending my program. At one point, they started bringing their kids. And I'm like, wow, this is kind of an honor. Like, they're getting so much out of what we're doing here because we're talking about the positive side of recovery, not the negative side of addiction. And, the first thing that they had to wrap their heads around was, I'm like, in here, you won't be identified as an addict. It's a part of you. It's not who you are.
Correct.
You should have seen the pushback I got from the traditional meetings that said, hey, what the F is this, right? But those kids came in and I started noticing, like, this is a chance for them to really be parents. And so we created the Addict to Athlete minor league, the 18-year and younger group. And I'm telling you, you're right. I see these kids step out of these comfort zones and all of a sudden they're running races with their parents and they're doing it on their own. Then they're playing football and they're doing these things they would have never done because they just didn't have that confidence. But once you see that light flick on, like you just said, they are unstoppable. And I love the fact that you do this because I've noticed, I think you've noticed, that when we get into addiction, it's not because, we're low life or anything else. It's because we hurt. And our hearts are they're very different. I tell people all the time, people that struggle with addiction have hearts that are way too big. And they try to debate me with that. But I'm like, they carry all of their pain and all of their friends' pains and all their family pains. And they don't work on their own. So as you see them starting to kind of gift their trust to you, what is their kind of mindset of future? Do they get like the young man who just graduated? Was he nervous to graduate? Did he feel like at that time, hey, I've got what I need and I'm always a part of this? Like, I'm curious, once you have to kind of let them fly, are they apprehensive or are they like, let's go?
So he's still coming to school.
Love it.
he, we don't kick them out. We let them come to school because they love, first and foremost, we've had students that had ran away from home. The sheriff come looking for them, to tell us they ran away from home. And I'm like, she's right there.
He's like, oh, okay.
Our students run away and they come to school.
Oh my gosh, Tina.
I'm
getting cold chills. I kid you not. I love that. Right? Yes. I would have never said I'm running away and going to school. That would not be my first destination. You're doing something right.
That's what they do. Yeah. And then also, I let my students, I probably shouldn't say this publicly, but I let my students sleep because, first and foremost, the majority of my students have co-occurring disorders, meaning that they have some sort of mental illness and substance use disorder. And so when you're talking about high anxiety, I had one student, she would sleep maybe 2 hours a night. Well, you cannot learn and function and pass classes with 2 hours of sleep a night. And so she came into school one day, she put the noise canceling headphones on, she put the blindfold on, she put the weighted blanket on her, she was laying in the beanbag and she fell asleep for 2.5 hours. I was so happy.
Because, okay, I want you to explain this because I know exactly what this means, but tell the listeners how important that is because at that point, that kid, she separated herself from the world. I can imagine someone in her situation putting headphones on to cancel all noise because that means that she can't be aware. To put that weighted blanket on to represent kind of that hug and then just that calm feeling to sleep. Do you know how much trust she must have with you to do that?
That's right.
So that's right. Listeners, listen to what Tina's saying.
Yeah. So this was a young lady that was both her birth parents had been incarcerated, severely mentally ill, severely with addictions, and it's just a heartbreaking story. At 5 years old, she was picked up at elementary school by a social worker that said, "We're going to go spend the night somewhere," and she never saw her family again. She was placed into foster care. And so this is a young lady that had severe abuse and neglect as a child. And so when she started using drugs at 12 years old and started drinking and then mixing medications and everything, it was out of self-medicating. She was self-medicating all of that anxiety, all of that, sadness and hurt. And for her to come and to sleep, I mean, seriously, if she would have opened her eyes and looked at me, I was standing over her like, yes, yes, I was so excited. And other people would be like, what the, that is messed up. But that exactly what you said. She trusted me. And, my whole point in creating the school was creating a safe, healing-centered environment.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Is I want this to be a place where they come and heal. So I wanted to share with you also real quick. You were talking about labeling.
Mm-hmm.
So what we also say every morning after our mental health check-in is this, it's called the Victorious Creed.
Oh.
And it's recovery is possible. And the students repeat after me. I deserve to be healthy. I am worthy of a positive life. I can accept my limitations, but I will not be defined by them. I belong here, a safe place of hope, healing, and second chances. I am compassionate, caring, and lovable. I am not a label or a diagnosis. Today I want to live. Today I can feel true freedom from all substances. I am victorious.
Oh, I am victorious. Holy cow. That makes me want to like join and start like doing push-ups or something. That's amazing.
Right?
Yes, that is bold. Who wrote that?
I wrote that. I had licensed mental health counselors, read it and help me with some of the wording. But, the one thing out of all of that is very impactful is them saying, I am compassionate, caring, and lovable.
Oh my gosh.
Because they don't feel like they're, cared about, or that they care about others, and they really don't feel lovable.
That's incredible.
So
that's incredible. And you guys do that, and it becomes kind of your battle cry to a certain degree, I would imagine.
Yes. Yep.
Wow. How do parents back you up, or even kind of co-mingle? I've noticed when I worked with youth, that was the hardest thing, was like you could help these kids to a point, but then their parents have been so stuck in their ways, and some of them would jump on board, but so many of them just didn't know how. They're just like, where do we start? And when the kids become more emotionally congruent, like able to start kind of functioning on their own, how strong does codependency start to kind of kick in, where these kids feel obligated to like go back to where it all started, so to speak? I mean, do you feel like parents support you? Do you feel like the kids have a hard time? Because I can't imagine what parent-teacher conference would look like.
So I speak with all of my parents every day, and so much so that I had to hire a caregiver advocate, because she is she's actually working on her certification to be a peer support specialist. Nice. And the reason for that is she is a mother of a child in recovery. And so she's been there. She's, she's been there, done that, got the t-shirts. So, and she is the most loving person and so supportive and encouraging. And I found myself spending more time with my parents than with the students. And it literally was eating up a lot of my time and energy, and, getting text messages at 2 a.m. And it was the parent, and we started to do this parent component in April of this year, and it has been phenomenal.
I love it.
When I tell you the impact of when you have a caregiver that is working on themselves and in recovery themselves, not necessarily sober and, and all that. I mean, of course, we would love for the parent to have that safe environment at home and lock up medications and not have alcohol and all that. But, some parents, I guess there's social drinkers out there. So
yeah, they do exist. I'm not one, but yeah.
I guess. I don't know. They're aliens to me.
I hear you.
But, it's so important for parents and caregivers. We call them caregivers because our students, majority, actually, this is interesting. Majority of my students are male students, adopted.
Wow. That
have been through some sort of very traumatic medical surgery before the age of 12.
Oh my heavens. Wow. And I'm talking that's interesting.
Open heart surgery, brain tumors, very horrific, surgeries.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was actually a component. When I wrote the business plan 5 years ago, I did not did not include that because I did not.
Well, you would never know it existed. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of a crazy outlier, because if you think about it, the same trauma that you went through with your friend, I can imagine a kid who goes through that thinks, well, God, why did you send me with this? So I can imagine like the turmoil in that. But then I'm also then curious about like, how do the students work with each other? Do they, because you get too many kids in one place, I'm sure there could be some feelings that could be hurt, but like, how do they interact together as a team, these youth in your high school?
So we truly become a family. And that is what is so impactful, is they really become their brother's keeper.
Brilliant.
And they, the one that just graduated, I've had 2 students graduate since I've been open, and cool. With diplomas, and they both have come back, and they stay like a month and a half, 2 months, before they actually, and they're welcome anytime, but they become like the big brother, big sister. They become that mentor.
Yeah, purpose.
That person. Yeah, that person that has been there, done that, and they're making it, and they're successful. So it's really incredible to see.
So on Team Addict, we do a lot of stuff with the family. We call it obviously the home team, right? The metaphors of creating a strong home team. You want home court advantage, and you don't let dumb things happen. Do you see when your kids go home and they're mingling with their families, do they come and report back that they're using the tools? Like, do they kind of say, hey, this is what happened?
Yeah.
And isn't that the most amazing thing? Like, what do you notice?
Yes. By the way, you're like an incredible interviewer. This is like the best interview I've ever had.
Okay, I'll be honest with you. When I found out you were a public speaker, I'm like, oh, finally, this is going to be great. Because, people get nervous and stuff. But yeah, and I'm a therapist too, so
Yes, well, you're incredible.
Well,
I'm like,
you.
Man, his questions are wonderful. This is so great. You're really diving deep. I love it. So here, it's always interesting because the students, they'll go, Miss Tina, have you been talking to my mom?
Yeah.
And I'm like,
why do you
what
ask?
Do you mean? They're like,
yeah.
Well, she is no, like I'm doing air quotes.
Uh-huh.
She has really wanted to bond with me lately.
I love it.
They start to realize like, oh my gosh, my parents really do care about me, or my parents really love me. And it's so funny. And I'm like, we talk to them about, well, maybe you're being more responsible. Maybe you're being more loving and caring.
I love it.
And maybe your parents are always like that, And
I love it.
So it truly is a family transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's awesome.
I can totally see that. I can see that. So, before we started recording, I mentioned something, and I will probably get emotional when I talk about this because it's something that I've noticed for a long time, and I don't see a lot of eyes on the situation. And that is what happens now after we're coming out. And I don't think we're quite done with it, obviously. I mean, we're losing more people now to overdose than we ever have in the history of this country. But when we're now starting to see the huge effects of the opiate epidemic with these kids who have lost primary caregivers, whether it be a mom or a dad or maybe even both, and they've been raised by grandparents or relatives or even placed into the foster system. And now I'm starting to notice I've got several that I've been working with recently that are 18, 19, and they are what's been kind of coined, and I told you I hate this title, but opiate orphans. I'm noticing that the emotional disconnect and this mistrust of anything that has to do with love or compassion is really challenging for them. And I'm noticing that we're not quite prepared for what happened. As hard as that opiate epidemic has been, I think this wave, Tina, is going to be much more devastating because we're going to have these kids who just don't believe they deserve to be loved. What are you noticing anything like this? Because I'm curious. Not a lot of people are talking about this, Tina.
Yeah. So I actually, I was in social work and all of that for many years. And then I was like, you know what, I'm going to become a teacher. And so I was a teacher at a dropout prevention school. It was all females. And I lasted 6 months. God bless teachers. I don't know how they do it, but
I hear you.
Anyways, so I had 55 female students. And I would say that this is when it really opened my eyes in 2010, how many of my students were parentless.
Wow.
Parentless. No parent. And and how many of these female students, now mind you, majority were on probation and really, really struggled with, dropping out of school, and many of them struggle with addictions and mental health. And
Yeah.
but how many of them didn't have their moms?
Oh,
How
geez.
many of these young ladies lost their mothers? And it broke my heart when I tell you, like, you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
I have been saying this for years and years and years. So many people, oh, the fatherless generation. I'm like, no. This is the parentless generation.
Yep.
It is heartbreaking. And so, the majority of my students, like I said, have been adopted. And I see this with a lot of my students, RAD, reactive attachment disorder.
Right.
So many of them have really, really severe trust issues.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking. It really is heartbreaking. And, I'm certified in TBRI, which is trust-based relational interventions. And I actually train all of my staff and my volunteers because, first and foremost,
Brilliant.
these are children that have been traumatized.
Yeah.
First and foremost.
Yeah.
So that's what we need to remember is these are children that have been traumatized, and then they're using addictions to self-medicate.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we need to realize. And, and I'm all about trying to stop that stigma of, being in recovery and that it's for weak people. And so that's something that I am constantly working on is really, helping our students to just have fun sober.
Yeah.
That we do so many things, kickball, zip lining, paddle boating, kayaking, you name it, fishing. We do so many things with them just to show them you can do things without being under the influence.
I love it. I'm a firm believer that movement equals healing. I mean, I've seen it on Addict to Athlete. Yes. I've seen it in my own life. It was funny when I started at Addict to Athlete and we'd go out running with some of my clients and stuff. And they started doing all this therapy with me out there on the trails and then on the public streets. I'm like, why are you guys doing therapy out here? We should be doing it in my office. I had no idea. Well, it's just EMDR therapy. I had no idea that's what it was at the time. But what I noticed is that with the youth, when we started doing that with them, it was this bonding stuff, like doing things, having experiences, teaching them. It means so much more to them, the time that's invested, not even so much the experience, but like they understand, like it took a while to get out to this place. It's taken a long time to set this stuff up. It's the time, isn't it? It really is like the most precious thing we can give the youth is our time. And I think it's a delicate thing too, because you've got to have the right intentions because kids are a lot more wise than the adults are. And they'll pick you off pretty quick if you don't have, if they think you're doing it for a job and not because it's something that, you want to give them. Have you noticed that? They question some of that, like, what are you doing?
So I had 7 students in the summertime, or I think it was in the summer. Yeah. And I had, we were sitting around talking and now mind you, I was the only staff, but I wasn't getting paid.
Yeah.
And I had these students, they looked at me and they're like, Miss Tina, you're probably making some cheddar, and they're like, you're making bank. And at the time I hadn't been paid in 6 weeks.
Oh, yeah.
And I looked at them and I had tears in my eyes and I was like, actually, I haven't made $1 in 6 weeks. And it was like instant street cred. They were like, oh, what?
What is this? Yeah.
And they're like, use some explicit language, but they're like, why are you here? And I'm like, because I love you guys. And this is my passion. Yeah. This is why I'm here. And they couldn't believe it. They, to this day, they're just like, I mean, I get paid now, but nothing like it's not $1 million.
It's not $1 million and it's enough to keep the lights on. But like, I know you have dreams, goals, and aspirations. There's still more things you want to do. And so
absolutely,
you said something earlier that I want to touch base on. It's kind of funny. You said you switched your major from interior design. I still think you're doing interior design. You're just doing it with bodies and souls, not so much, rooms, right?
I like that. Yes.
I think you're spot on. But I also see down here that, Tina, you are a bodybuilder.
Yeah.
Well, what got you into bodybuilding, for crying out loud? That's awesome.
Oh, it's so funny because I was just sharing this story the other day with my boyfriend that I started gymnastics. I was always, my dad always joked around. He has two daughters, one that runs like a girl, one that runs like a boy. And I was the one that ran like boy.
Brilliant.
So I always played tennis, and my dad taught me how to play tennis like at the age of 3. And I started gymnastics at 3 years old. And so I was always very athletic my entire life. And so I ran track, 4x100, 4x200, and I did the last leg. Didn't know that was the fastest position, And,
yeah, that's awesome.
and just, I was just very modest, very humble, and just I loved, I have unmedicated ADHD, so that's why I'm like, oh,
no wonder I like you. No wonder I like you. Gotcha. There's something we gotta do a research study on that too. Anyway.
That's right. Yeah. That's a whole nother show, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, I have all this energy. And I remember someone saying to me, like, actually, it was a clinical supervisor when I was in my first social work job. And I had made a mention, I said something about quitting cigarettes. And she goes, you're so stubborn, you probably will. And I did.
Brilliant.
And I remember thinking at that point, I could use my stubbornness for good.
Oh, yeah.
And then I remember thinking I could use my energy for good. And so I started using, my energy for physical, athletic abilities and all of that.
Nice.
And here 20 years ago, I had this dream. I really wanted to compete in bodybuilding.
Uh-huh.
And so, but I couldn't eat right.
Yeah.
I kept thinking, I'll just, get out there and lift weights and I'll be fine. And thank God I have my dad's physique. And so I can build muscle pretty quick. And I was a gymnast, so I'm built. And so I would work out, but I couldn't eat right. I was not eating healthy. And so I would get a personal trainer and they'd say, we don't want to waste your money. So, you got to eat right too, or you're just going to waste your time and money. And so then I'd quit, I'd quit working out.
Yeah.
Well, then I had 11 surgeries in like 12 years and 3 of which were life-threatening surgeries, but by the grace of God, I made it through. And so I got through all those surgeries. And then I was like, you know what? I finally am at a place physically that maybe I can do this. And in September 2020, I fasted from sugar. Wow. And at the end of September 2020. And that's what I realized is as a recovering person, I was addicted to sugar.
Oh, we all are. Everybody.
I'm back on the wagon.
So glad you said that. Yeah, it's true. That's so interesting. I love it.
Back on the wagon. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to get. So anyways, and I actually lost like 35 pounds back in 2021. And I got a trainer right away because I was like, you know what, I'm going to do this. I am stubborn.
There you go.
I'm going to make it work for me.
Yep.
And I have all this energy. So let me just put this into eating healthy, drinking a ton of water and, lifting weights. And so I had my first competition, my first bodybuilding competition. I would send you pictures, but it's bikini, and I don't think you want to see me in a G-string just
there
yet.
You go.
So,
yeah. Hey, tune in on ESPN too, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I dig it.
So here, I walked on that stage. The moment I walked on that stage, I won. Because I finally felt like I was matching my inner strength to my outer strength.
Beautiful.
I'm sorry, matching my outer strength to my inner strength.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So I placed 6th in the 45 plus masters category for 45-year-olds plus. I'm an old lady, and I placed 6th. And I got a medal and everything. There was only 6 of us competing.
That's all that matters. Who cares? It's the best. I love it. Yeah.
I just tell people I placed 6th. That's it.
That's because there should have been at least 7 people. Come on. So I think you're fine.
Correct.
I'm still going to get that.
It was my first competition. I tell you what, when they gave me that medal and put it around my neck, I could have done a backflip. I wasn't expecting that,
Yeah.
And so that was a miracle. So what I'm doing, so last year I actually did a different type of competition. I was in a pageant, and it was Miss Corporate America pageant. I got first runner up. And so that's been incredible. And then this year, I'm going to do a savage race. I want to do one of these obstacle course races.
Oh, man.
So
let's go.
I'm training for one of those. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
See, I love that, though. Now, the thing about this, listeners, I want you to kind of take particular attention to, and I see this because Addict to Athlete, we use a lot of health, recreation, and whatnot to erase addiction and replace it with things of greater value. But we have a sister program called Addict to Artist, and it's the same principles, And when I noticed the very first time we had the artists start to kind of do things, we had an art show. And as we had all these artists putting up their art on the wall to do this art show, there was one gal in particular that had this beautiful photo she had taken. And as I walked up to her, I'm like, "This is gorgeous. How much you pricing this to?" And she's like, "Oh, maybe like $15." I'm like, "Kelly, the frame is $15. I mean, how much?" And so It took me forever to explain to her that she should do it at $100, right? And it hit me that when people put their stuff up there, and even if it's like, something that they don't know if anyone else is like, that's a showing a part of them. And so now we're having strangers come in and critique what's them. How I love bodybuilding for that purpose. How much confidence and strength did you have to not to follow through, but to go up there and say, all right, the thing that every person wants to avoid, critique me, How did you wrap your head around that, and how confident did you feel? Because that shows a huge leap from where you were to where you are now. Does that make sense? Like, you're like, I'm fine with whatever someone says.
Yeah. So it was me versus me.
Yeah. Brilliant.
My whole life, it's been me versus me. And it is hard, especially when you compete, it's hard to compare. I challenge. That is a challenge to compare myself to other women. And I got to share this really quick, funny story. So Please. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna compete in the masters level, just 45-year-old plus. I want to just the old ladies and I up there. I was 46 years old, and here one day. When I was there the day of the competition, this guy talked me into doing the true novice. True novice category is for people, it's your first competition period, no matter what your age is. And I remember saying to my coach, like, I am only going to do 45 plus. I'm only going to do the masters category. Yeah. And the reason being is I'm like, I don't need to be standing beside some young girl that's never had a baby and no surgeries, Yeah. So I get up there for the true novice, and I'm beside a 19-year-old.
You're like, oh crap, it's happening. It's happening right now. Yeah.
And a 24-year-old. And their bodies are perfect. And I'm like, they're flawless.
Like, who talked me into this?
But I rocked it. And I was like, you know what? My scars on my stomach, it looks like I lost a knife fight in a dark alley, but like,
brilliant.
You know what? They each have a story, and my stretch marks. I have my son today, and so yeah.
See, even that is a metaphor for healing, because those scars heal. Yes. And I think if we can teach the youth that same concept, that it may hurt right now, and each time you come to school, we're going to unwrap that scar or that wound, and we're going to scrub it. It's going to hurt a little bit, but we're going to send you back home with it wrapped up, and then repeat the process. Pretty soon, that thing heals. And that scar can just be a reminder. I was told by one person, Tina, a long time ago, that ran a similar program to what we're doing, that scars never heal. And I said, that's baloney. I'm like, if they didn't heal, they'd be these open wound gashes. And I said, in fact, they heal so much that when you touch it, you can't feel it because it's numb there. But you can always look at it and remember where that came from, and then go about your day. And I love that metaphor too. So even though you had those and you carried those, they mean something. And I think youth, you should probably pay attention to that. Although it hurts now, with the right people in place, with the right mindset, you're gonna heal, right? I mean, I talk about recovery a lot too, Tina, but I also use the thought process of we can heal from this too. Don't you think?
Absolutely. You hear the saying, hurt people, but I'm like, healed people can heal people.
Yep.
And that's what we need to focus on, is that, there is healing, there's hope, there's healing, and it's available to all of us.
Yeah, it's spot on. Well, hey, Tina, as we wrap up here, how do people get in touch with what you're doing for donations, for just, to just kind of see and support? What kind of websites, social media pages? I'd love to know where we can find your books. Like, give us a little bit of how we can connect with you.
So I actually just was on Facebook and Instagram. I liked your pages.
Well, there you go. All right.
Yeah. Personally, Tina Talks Truth. I post a lot of things on my Tina Talks Truth Instagram as well as Facebook. And I have an Instagram for the nonprofit as well. It's Florida Recovery Schools of Tampa Bay. But if they want to go to a website, they could go to Become Just One, the number one, .com. So becomejustone.com, because it only takes one positive adult in one child's life to make a difference.
Oh, I love that. Oh my heck, I love that. We're going to attach all that to the social media post when this podcast goes live here on Monday. And yeah, I would love to keep in contact with you because Team Addict Athlete, we'd love to support you. Maybe I'd love to come even see and meet the kids when we can get out there to Florida. I always look for an excuse to travel outside of Utah during the winter because it's so flipping cold here. But
yes,
come on
down.
Yeah, we'd love to send your students just a little care package of what Team Addict Athlete has, maybe some stuff, and just to kind of show that they've got support all over the place. Because I think what you're doing is absolutely amazing, and as it gets bigger, it's these kind of smaller experiences that you're gonna really cherish, because unfortunately, you're gonna have many more students because the need is out there. What's your message to the parent who has a child that's struggling, and to the child who doesn't think that there's hope for the future? What do you tell each of those people?
For the caregivers, that there is help and there's hope. You just have to be open to it. You just have to be open to it to receive that help. And to the students out there that are struggling, there is hope, and don't quit before the miracle happens. Yeah. I think that is the most important. That was one of the mottos that I had, heard, and it kept me alive. Don't quit before the miracle happens. Yeah.
And the final line of your quote, right? I am victorious. Yeah, my heavens. I think that's going to be a great title for the podcast. So I love it. Tina, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Even though we had a few bizarre technical difficulties, we pulled this thing off. Well done.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for your patience and your time.
Well, I should be saying that to you because I know your time's just as valuable as mine. But listeners, you've been well fed. Thank you all so much for downloading and sharing. Follow these links. Grab some of Tina's books. You can tell she's got a heart that is beating in the rhythm of recovery. And anything we can do to support her and her high school out there, we'll put links out too, because we'd love to get you guys some funding and just be able to share some of what we have with you. Athletes, again, reach out if you need help. And remember to always turn your mess into a message. 15 years getting loaded, 15 years till his liver exploded. Now what's Bob gonna do now that he can't drink? The doctor said